Hi, this is Charlotte Reeves from Unleashed Education, and you tuned into another editing toolbox video where we share a quick little tip to help you make your pet photography editing life easier. Today we're going to be discussing adding a golden glow to your photos. Now, what exactly is a golden glow? Let's cover that first. So a lot of the time in backlit images, you'll see they have quite a flared out kind of look. There's a bit of a low contrast background. There might be lots of bright light coming from behind. Unfortunately, this happens because direct light hits the end glass element of the lens, and it actually kind of ruins the image quality. So while you end up with a really pretty glowy kind of background, you do lose a lot of detail in the subject. It's very difficult to get back in the editing process. So how can you create this feeling in your images while also having a really nice, sharply defined subject with good detail and contrast? You fake it, basically. You create a golden glow. So adding extra flair to the background creates more of a sparkle and some more interest in your image. The background spotlight effect also helps to highlight the subject and draw attention to them, which is exactly what we want to achieve when we're photographing pets. So the important thing to consider is what kind of images does this effect suit? You have to be really mindful of the light. If you have a look at these images here, they were taken in either cloud or shade light where there wasn't direct light coming from behind the subject. The light overall is quite soft. There may be some bright areas in the background, but you wouldn't say that the light is coming from behind the subject. So adding that golden glow in behind the subject doesn't make a lot of sense for these sorts of images. So what sort of images do suit having the golden glow? These kinds of images where the light is definitely coming from behind already. You don't want to put light on the background if it doesn't make sense from a visual perspective. When you've got light coming from the background, it makes sense to see that beautiful flared out look in the background. So next up, how do we create this effect? Now, it can be done in both Lightroom and Photoshop. With the new masking tools available in Lightroom Classic version 11 Plus, it makes it a lot easier to do in Lightroom. It's super quick, it's adjustable, and it's non-destructive. So using Lightroom's masking tools is my preferred method for creating this look. Without further ado, let's dive in and I'll show you exactly how to do this. So you want to go into your masking tools. You can see I've already done some edits to this image. This is what it looked like before, and this is after just the global edits to the image. So we'll go into the masking tools here. You might see your masking tools sitting up here. Usually that's where they sit, unless you move them into this panel here. I like having them in this panel here because I feel it's a little bit neater. So there are a couple of little masks in here already just to kind of fix up highlight areas. So let's create this golden glow mask. By clicking create new mask, we want to add a radial gradient to start with. So we're going to drag this down from the top. Now you'll notice I'm actually in the black on white overlay. Sorry, white on black overlay. Most people will be on the color overlay to start, which gives you a red overlay. I find it a little bit easier to see exactly where the mask is going if I'm on the white on black overlay. So I'll often find myself sort of switching between the two. But let's just switch back to the color overlay for now. Now, because we only want this to apply to the background, we don't want it spilling over onto the front side of the subject, so the side of the dog that's facing us. So we need to subtract the subject. So you can just go subtract, select subject, and Lightroom will detect the subject and then subtract that from your mask. Now, if we just do a little quick check by going white on black, just to make sure it's done a good job of selecting the subject. Yep, that looks pretty good. Now, the other thing to note here is if you need to, you can move the radial gradient around independently of where the subject is. So you just need to click on the radial gradient and then move that if you need to. The subject stays selected in the same spot, which is really handy. So let's go back to the color overlay. I'm just going to manually turn that overlay off by pressing O on the keyboard. I like to do this before I start moving the sliders around because it gives me a visual starting point. The gradient overlay will turn off automatically once you start moving the sliders, but I prefer to turn it off manually first. So there's a particular combination of sliders that we need to use here to create the look. Generally, I'm taking the temperature up to make the light warmer. I'll often take the exposure up a little too. The most effective slider that you'll need to use to create this effect is the Dehaze slider. Now, taking the Dehaze slider to the right dehazes, so it adds detail and contrast. Taking the Dehaze slider to the left does the opposite, so it removes contrast and detail from that area. So let's take that to the left and see how it's starting to get that sort of hazy, sort of flared out look, which is exactly what we're going for. Now, often when you take the Dehaze slider down, it leaches the color out of it, so you might even end up adding a little bit of extra warmth into that area. You'll notice here that because Lightroom has selected the subject, let me just zoom in so we can see, and because we've lightened and messed around with the background, you can actually see a bit of a giveaway along the edges of the fur here. Now, if you think about it, when the light is coming from behind, you would expect it to hit the back of the dog. That's what creates this rim light here. So it makes sense for that lighting effect to actually spill over a little bit. So let's just go into the mask here and manually adjust this with a brush. So I'm going to add a brush. I want to make sure auto mask isn't ticked because I want full control over where this brush is going. And I'm just going to run along quite a large feather. I'm just going to run along the edges here. And this is going to sort of help that light bleed over and through the hair on the edges. So we don't really need to go all the way down here because if you look at the mask, the effect does drop off the further you get down into this kind of area. So we want to make sure we're not kind of letting that bleed over too much where it shouldn't be. I think that's pretty good though. So let's take a look at the image as a whole. I think that looks pretty good. So we'll turn that mask off and on. And the reason this looks so good with this image is it already had that golden light coming from behind. All we've done is enhance it. So let's move on to the next image. So this was taken on the edge of a pine forest. So there was light coming through from behind. You can actually see it filtering through the trees behind here. To help my three beautiful subjects stand out a little bit more, I'm going to do pretty much exactly the same thing. So we're going to start off with a radial gradient. And I want to sort of center it around the area. Let me just change this mode here. I want to center it around the area where the light is actually coming from, which is over to the left a little bit. So probably around there. Just going to make it a little bit bigger. Okay, and again, we want to subtract the subjects. Check the masking. It doesn't look too bad. It's over on Opal's ear a little bit there, but that's not anything major. I'm going to turn that off by pressing O on the keyboard. And then same thing. I'm going to use a Dehaze slider to the left. See how it leaches the color out? Going to add some extra warmth in there, quite a bit of extra warmth. Add a little bit of exposure. Because there's some blown out highlights here, I'm just going to take the highlights down a touch and also take the contrast down a bit too. So all of these adjustments are designed to replicate what sun flare would be doing if it was coming through from behind like that. So let's just turn that off and on. So when you're shooting in wooded areas, it's always really important to try and make sure that there aren't trees coming out of your dog's head. In the original, before I added the golden glow to the background, you can pretty prominently see these trees here. But by adding that, it's sort of helped to let them fade into the background more and help the subject stand out more. So that's another good reason that you might want to add that golden glow to the background of your images. So zooming in to check, I don't think it's looking overly obvious, especially not as obvious as in the previous image, that we've been messing around with the background. So I'm not going to add a brush here. I think that looks fine as is. So there we go. Nice, quick, easy, subtle. Totally matches in with the lighting and I think is a really beautiful effect. All right, last one. Actually the same location, but in more of an open area. We've definitely got some light kind of coming through from behind. Not as much direct light falling on Opal, but definitely still light coming from behind in this situation. So I've already added a mask here just on Opal, just to sort of help brighten her up a little, make her look nice and white. And let's add this golden glow mask. So create new mask, radial gradient. It's going to take up quite a bit of that background. Subtract the subject, have a quick check. So it's sort of gone over the edges of Opal's ears a little bit, but that's fine. Turn that back to the color overlay and then press O to turn that off. And let's add this glow. So Dehaze slider to the left, leaches the color out. So let's put some color back in again. Take the exposure up a little. Maybe just adjust that a little. Take the contrast down, maybe the highlights down a touch. Maybe a bit more warmth, really putting a nice golden glow in behind here. And let's just turn that off and on again. See how it's really helping Opal stand out from that background nicely. Let's zoom in and have a quick pixel peep around Opal's ears. I think that actually looks pretty good. I'm not really seeing a lot of evidence that we've messed with the background here, so I think we can kind of get away with it, like the last image, without actually adding another brush there. So, turn that off. And on again. There we go. So there are 3 images where we have added a beautiful golden glow. Obviously they are just Lightroom edits, so there's a bit more to do in all 3 of those images, but it's amazing how quickly and easily you can create this effect. You just need to remember to make sure you only do it to images where it makes sense with the existing lighting. I hope that's given you another quick and easy tool to add to your editing toolbox, and I'll see you for the next tutorial soon. Thanks for joining me.